The mop bucket wheels squeaked softly against the polished concrete as Marcus Rivera pushed it down the dimly lit corridor of the Navy SEAL training facility. At 42, his movements carried a precision that most people missed, each step deliberate and quiet despite his worn work boots. The night shift suited him perfectly. Fewer people around meant fewer questions, fewer stares, and most importantly, fewer chances for someone to recognize the man he used to be. Marcus paused outside the tactical training room, listening to the faint echoes of equipment being stored away. The day shift instructors had finished their work hours ago, leaving behind the scent of sweat, determination, and something else he knew well but tried to forget. The smell of warriors preparing for battle. He pushed open the door and began his methodical cleaning routine, wiping down surfaces with the same attention to detail he once applied to checking weapons and planning missions. As he worked, his eyes automatically catalogued every detail, the position of training equipment, sight lines, potential entry and exit points. Old habits died hard, especially when they had kept you alive in places where death lurked around every corner. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made him look up. Instructor Jake Morrison appeared in the doorway, his muscular frame filling the space as he surveyed the room with obvious irritation. Morrison's voice carried the sharp edge of authority mixed with disdain. "You missed a spot over there by the weight rack, janitor. These facilities need to be spotless for tomorrow's training. These men deserve better than your half-hearted effort." Marcus nodded quietly, moving toward the area Morrison had indicated. "Yes sir, I'll take care of it right away." His voice remained steady, respectful, giving no hint of the storm brewing beneath the surface. "Where in the world are you watching from tonight, and what time is it where you are? This story of hidden strength and quiet dignity is just beginning, and no matter what hour you're listening, you're about to discover that appearances can be the most dangerous deception of all." Morrison left without another word, his heavy boots echoing down the corridor until silence returned. Marcus continued cleaning, his movements unchanged despite the humiliation. He had endured far worse than condescending instructors, in places where respect was earned through blood and brotherhood rather than rank and privilege. As he worked through the facility, Marcus moved with the fluid efficiency of someone who understood every inch of tactical space. He cleaned the armory with particular care, noting the inventory systems and security protocols that could be improved. His trained eye spotted vulnerabilities that would make any security expert nervous, but he kept his observations to himself. The communications room came next, where banks of monitors displayed training schedules and operational updates. Marcus wiped down each screen methodically, his reflection briefly appearing in the dark glass. The man staring back looked tired, weathered by years of carrying secrets too heavy for most shoulders. But his eyes still held the alertness of someone who had learned to see danger before it arrived. At midnight, Marcus took his regulation break, stepping outside into the cool California night. He pulled out his phone and saw a text from his daughter Sophia. "Good night, Daddy. I love you. Sweet dreams." The message was accompanied by a drawing she had made of them together, two stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Marcus smiled for the first time that evening, his fingers tracing the phone screen gently. Sophia was 8 years old and believed her father was the most important person in the world, simply because he worked hard and came home to her every morning with stories about keeping the base clean and safe. She attended the base school during the day while he slept, never knowing that the same hallways he mopped at night were where some of the world's most elite warriors trained. To Sophia, her daddy was perfect exactly as he was, a night janitor who sang her to sleep with old songs and helped her with homework at the kitchen table. Marcus put his phone away and returned to work, pushing his cart toward the main training complex. Tomorrow Sophia had a school presentation about heroes, and she had chosen to speak about him. The irony was not lost on Marcus, but her innocent faith meant everything. The next evening brought the familiar routine, but something felt different as Marcus arrived for his shift. A group of SEAL recruits were running late-night drills in the main courtyard, their instructor's voice carrying sharp commands through the darkness. Marcus recognized the tactical scenario immediately, a hostage rescue simulation he had run countless times in places where failure meant real casualties. As he cleaned the windows overlooking the training area, Marcus watched the recruits struggle with their approach angles. They were making fundamental mistakes that would get them killed in actual combat. The entry point they had chosen was tactically unsound, their communication protocols were sloppy, and their backup positioning left dangerous blind spots. Marcus gripped his cleaning cloth tighter, fighting the urge to intervene. These were good men, brave men who deserved proper guidance. But he was just the janitor, invisible and irrelevant to their world of elite warfare. Morrison appeared at his side, also watching the exercise through the window. "Look at these recruits fumbling around like amateurs," he said with obvious frustration. "Half of them will never make it through selection. They lack the instinct for real combat situations." Marcus nodded politely, continuing his work while Morrison continued his critique. "The problem is they are approaching from the wrong angle entirely. Any experienced operator would see that the eastern wall provides better cover and multiple exit strategies." Morrison turned to stare at him, eyebrows raised in surprise and annoyance. "Excuse me, janitor. Did you just offer tactical advice? What would a maintenance worker possibly know about SEAL operations?" The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken tension. Marcus felt the familiar weight of his past pressing against his carefully maintained facade. "I just watch a lot of military documentaries, sir. Sometimes the camera angles show different perspectives." Morrison laughed harshly, the sound cutting through the night air. "Documentaries. Right. Well, next time keep your expert television analysis to yourself and focus on what you are actually qualified to do. Clean." Marcus resumed his work as Morrison walked away, but his hands moved with barely controlled precision. Every fiber of his being wanted to demonstrate exactly how wrong Morrison was about tactical approaches, about leadership, about the man standing right in front of him. The humiliation burned deeper than Marcus expected as he continued his rounds that night. Morrison's laughter echoed in his mind, mixing with memories of respect he once commanded from men who trusted him with their lives. But those days belonged to a different man, one who wore different uniforms and carried different responsibilities. Marcus pushed his cart toward the administrative wing, where framed photos lined the hallways. Images of decorated SEALs, Medal of Honor recipients, and fallen heroes who had given everything for their country. He paused before one particular photo, studying the face of a man he had served alongside in Afghanistan. Someone who would never make it home to see his children grow up. That was why Marcus chose invisibility over recognition. Sophia needed her father alive more than the world needed another soldier. Every morning when he walked through their apartment door, tired from his night shift, she would run to him with drawings and stories from school. Her laughter was worth more than any medal or commendation he had ever received. The sound of voices drew his attention as he approached the instructor lounge. Through the partially open door, he could see Morrison holding court with several other trainers, recounting the evening's interaction with obvious amusement. Morrison's voice carried clearly down the hallway. "You should have seen this janitor trying to give me tactical advice tonight. Apparently watching television makes him an expert on SEAL operations. These support staff really need to understand their place around here." The other instructors laughed along, but Marcus noticed one of them, Commander Sarah Walsh, remained silent. She was the facility commander, a woman who had earned her position through exceptional service and keen judgment. Her expression suggested she was less amused by Morrison's story than he expected. Marcus moved past the lounge quietly, but he caught Commander Walsh's eye through the doorway. For a brief moment, something passed between them, a flicker of recognition that made Marcus uncomfortable. Not recognition of his identity, but recognition of something in his bearing that did not match his position. He completed his shift without further incident, but the feeling lingered. As he drove home through the pre-dawn darkness, Marcus wondered how long he could maintain his careful balance between the man he was and the man he pretended to be. The following week brought an unusual tension to the facility that Marcus felt immediately upon arriving for his shift. Security personnel moved with heightened alertness, and additional checkpoints had appeared at key locations throughout the base. Something had changed, and his instincts told him it was not routine. Commander Walsh was conducting a briefing in the main conference room as Marcus began cleaning the adjacent hallway. Through the open door, he could hear fragments of conversation about potential security threats and elevated readiness protocols. The words were carefully chosen, but Marcus understood the subtext. Someone was watching the facility, and that someone posed a credible danger. As he mopped the floor outside the briefing room, Marcus processed every detail he could gather. Enhanced patrols, modified access procedures, and communication protocols that suggested they were preparing for a specific type of threat. His mind automatically began cataloging vulnerabilities, potential attack vectors, and defensive positions throughout the facility. The briefing concluded, and personnel filed out past Marcus without acknowledgement. He was invisible to them, just part of the background infrastructure they took for granted. But invisibility had advantages when you needed to observe and understand without being noticed. Morrison emerged from the meeting looking frustrated and spoke to another instructor in the hallway. These security upgrades are going to interfere with training schedules. We have recruits who need to complete their qualification exercises, and now we are treating the place like a fortress. Marcus continued his work, but every sense remained alert. His years of experience had taught him to trust the instincts that kept him alive in hostile territory. Something was building toward a confrontation, and the facility was not as prepared as they believed. What part of this story resonates most with you so far? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you knew more than people realized, where your experience could help but circumstances kept you silent? Sometimes the most dangerous moments arrive when we least expect them, and preparation becomes the difference between safety and catastrophe. Later that evening, as Marcus worked through the training areas, he noticed details that confirmed his growing concerns. Security cameras had blind spots, patrol routes followed predictable patterns, and emergency response protocols had gaps that a determined adversary could exploit. Over the next several nights, Marcus noticed patterns that made his blood run cold. During his cleaning rounds, he observed irregular movement in the perimeter areas, shadows that did not belong to scheduled patrols, and subtle disturbances in places where no one should have been. Someone was conducting surveillance on the facility, learning their routines and identifying weaknesses. Marcus found himself in an impossible position. His experience screamed warnings that he could not voice without revealing who he truly was. Every instinct demanded action, but every rational thought reminded him of the life he had built for Sophia, the safety that came from anonymity. On Thursday night, Marcus made a decision that went against every fiber of his being. He approached the security desk during his break, where Sergeant Mills was reviewing patrol reports. Sergeant Mills looked up with mild annoyance at being interrupted by maintenance staff. "What do you need, Rivera?" Marcus chose his words carefully, knowing he was walking a dangerous line. "I have been working nights here for 8 months now, and I notice things during my rounds. There have been some unusual activities in the eastern perimeter area over the past week. Might be worth checking." Mills frowned, his expression shifting from annoyance to skepticism. "Unusual activities? What kind of activities? Are you talking about wildlife or something more serious?" Marcus felt the weight of his past pressing against his carefully constructed present. "Small things, sir. Disturbed vegetation where there should not be foot traffic. Equipment positioned differently than usual. Probably nothing, but I thought you should know." The sergeant made a note, but his dismissive tone suggested he was humoring the concerned janitor rather than taking the report seriously. "We will look into it, Rivera. Thanks for bringing it to our attention." As Marcus walked away, he knew his warning would be filed and forgotten. The security personnel saw him as he appeared to be, a night janitor with too much imagination and too much time to notice insignificant details. They could not see the combat veteran who had learned to read terrain and threats in places where missing such signs meant death. That same night, Morrison caught Marcus near the armory during his cleaning routine. The instructor's expression was hostile as he approached. Morrison's voice carried the sharp edge of authority mixed with suspicion as he confronted Marcus near the armory entrance. "I heard you have been bothering security with conspiracy theories about prowlers and mysterious activities. Last week you were giving tactical advice, now you are playing amateur detective. What exactly do you think you are doing here, Rivera? Marcus continued cleaning, his movement steady despite the confrontation. I am just doing my job, sir. Keeping the facility clean and reporting anything that seems out of place. That is what maintenance staff are supposed to do. Morrison stepped closer, his presence intimidating in the narrow hallway. Your job is to mop floors and empty trash cans. Your job is not to waste security personnel time with paranoid fantasies. These men have real responsibilities protecting this facility from actual threats, not imaginary shadows that exist only in a janitor's overactive imagination. The words stung more than Marcus expected, not because of their cruelty but because of their dangerous short-sightedness. Men were going to die because of this arrogance, this refusal to listen to warnings that could save lives. But Marcus swallowed his response and nodded respectfully. You are right, sir. I will focus on my cleaning duties and leave security matters to the professionals. Morrison smiled with satisfaction at Marcus's apparent submission. That is exactly what I wanted to hear. Know your place, Rivera, and stay in it. This facility runs on discipline and respect for chain of command, not on maintenance workers playing soldier. As Morrison walked away, Marcus felt something break inside him. Not his resolve to protect Sophia, but his willingness to remain completely passive while danger approached. There had to be a way to prepare without revealing his identity, to position himself where he could respond when the threat materialized. Have you ever felt completely helpless while watching danger approach, knowing you could prevent disaster but finding yourself powerless to act? Sometimes the greatest courage comes not from charging forward, but from finding the strength to do what is right despite the personal cost. That evening, Marcus altered his cleaning routine slightly, spending more time in areas with clear sight lines to vulnerable points throughout the facility. If something happened, he would be ready to respond, even if it meant risking everything he had worked to protect. Friday night arrived with an unsettling stillness that made Marcus's instincts scream warnings he could not ignore. The usual sounds of the facility seemed muted, and even the ocean breeze carried intention that spoke of approaching storm. As he began his shift, Marcus noticed that the night training exercise scheduled for the main complex was running behind schedule. At 11:30, Marcus was cleaning the eastern corridor when the lights suddenly cut out. Emergency lighting kicked in seconds later, bathing everything in an eerie red glow that transformed familiar hallways into something ominous and threatening. His military training immediately took over, every sense sharpening as he processed what the power outage meant. The facility's backup generators should have restored full power within 30 seconds. When they failed to engage, Marcus knew this was not an equipment malfunction. Someone had deliberately disabled the primary systems, and they understood the facility well enough to neutralize the backup protocols as well. Marcus abandoned his cleaning cart and moved silently toward the communication center, his body automatically shifting into the fluid movement patterns of someone trained for combat operations. As he approached the main corridor intersection, he heard what he had been dreading, the sound of suppressed gunfire coming from the direction of the training complex. The attack had begun, and everything Marcus had predicted was coming to pass. Somewhere in the darkness, SEAL recruits and instructors were facing an enemy they had not seen coming, fighting a battle they were not prepared for because their warnings had been dismissed as the paranoid fantasies of an overimaginative janitor. Marcus pressed himself against the wall and listened carefully to the pattern of gunfire. Multiple shooters, coordinated movement, professional execution. This was not some random assault by amateurs. These were trained operatives who had studied the facility, learned its weaknesses, and chosen their moment perfectly. Through the emergency lighting, Marcus could see muzzle flashes reflecting off the walls near the training complex. The attackers had trapped the SEALs in their own facility, turning their training environment into a battleground where the enemy held every advantage. Marcus faced the moment he had spent months trying to avoid. He could retreat to safety, call for backup, and let others handle the crisis while protecting his carefully constructed new identity. Or he could do what every fiber of his being demanded and enter that fight as the warrior he had never stopped being. Marcus made his choice in the space between heartbeats. Sophia would understand someday that her father could not stand by while good men died, even if it meant risking everything they had built together. He moved through the facility with the lethal grace of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of silent warfare. From his cleaning supplies, Marcus retrieved items that had seemed innocent hours earlier but now became tactical tools. A metal mop handle transformed into a close-quarters weapon, cleaning chemicals became smoke screens, and his intimate knowledge of every corridor and room became a strategic advantage the attackers could never anticipate. Marcus approached the training complex using maintenance corridors that did not appear on any standard facility map. Through ventilation grates, he could see the tactical situation developing below. 3 armed intruders had cornered a group of SEAL recruits and instructors in the main training bay, using superior positioning and firepower to maintain control. Morrison was among the trapped personnel, his earlier arrogance replaced by the grim determination of someone fighting for survival. The recruits followed his commands with disciplined precision, but they were outgunned and trapped with limited options for counterattack or escape. Marcus positioned himself above the main training area, studying the attackers' movements and communication patterns. They were professionals, but they had made one critical error. They had planned for resistance from the facility's official security and trained personnel. They had not planned for a ghost who knew every hidden passage and vulnerability in their carefully constructed kill zone. The first attacker never saw Marcus coming. Moving like liquid shadow through the maintenance access above the training bay, Marcus dropped silently behind the gunman's position. The confrontation lasted less than 10 seconds, ending with Marcus in possession of military-grade weapons and tactical equipment. The sound of the struggle caught the attention of the second attacker, who turned toward the disturbance with his weapon raised. Marcus was already moving, using the training equipment as cover while he closed the distance between them. His years of experience allowed him to read the gunman's positioning and timing with deadly accuracy. Below them, Morrison and the recruits heard the sounds of combat coming from an impossible direction. Someone was fighting the attackers from positions that should have been empty, using tactics that spoke of elite training and combat experience that surpassed even their own. The second attacker spun toward the sound of his fallen partner, but Marcus was already inside his reaction time. Moving with fluid precision that seemed to defy physics, Marcus disarmed the gunman using techniques that belonged to special operations playbooks few people had ever seen executed in real combat. Morrison watched in stunned silence as the quiet janitor he had dismissed and humiliated demonstrated combat skills that surpassed anything he had witnessed in 20 years of military service. The man moving through the training bay was not the invisible maintenance worker from their previous encounters. This was a warrior operating at the highest levels of tactical expertise. The third attacker, realizing his operation was collapsing, attempted to retreat toward the main exit while maintaining suppressive fire. Marcus anticipated the movement, using his knowledge of the facility layout to intercept the escape route through passages that existed outside the attacker's operational planning. The final confrontation occurred in the main corridor, where emergency lighting created dramatic shadows that seemed to bend around Marcus as he moved. The attacker was skilled and desperate, but he was facing someone who had survived conflicts in places where death was measured in heartbeats and survival required perfection. When the shooting stopped, Marcus stood over 3 neutralized threats while Morrison and 6 SEAL recruits stared at him with expressions that mixed amazement, confusion, and dawning respect. The man they had ignored and dismissed had just conducted a tactical operation that none of them could have executed with such precision and effectiveness. Morrison found his voice first, though it carried none of its usual arrogance. "Rivera, what the hell just happened here? Who are you really?" Marcus looked at the group of men he had just saved, knowing that his carefully constructed anonymity was shattered beyond repair. The emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across his face as he made the decision to answer honestly for the first time in 8 months. "Have you ever been completely wrong about someone, so wrong that it changed everything you thought you knew about judging people? Sometimes the most extraordinary individuals are hiding in plain sight, and we miss them because we see only what we expect to see rather than what is actually standing right in front of us. My name is Marcus Rivera, and I am a single father working as a night janitor because it gives me stable hours to care for my daughter. I am also a decorated Green Beret with 15 years of special operations experience in counterterrorism. The silence that followed Marcus's revelation stretched across the training bay like a physical presence. Morrison stared at the man he had spent weeks humiliating, processing the magnitude of his misjudgment. The recruits exchanged glances that spoke of wonder and newfound respect for someone they had never bothered to notice. Commander Walsh arrived with the facility's rapid response team, her tactical assessment taking in the neutralized threats and the unharmed personnel with professional efficiency. Her eyes found Marcus immediately, and something in her expression suggested she was not entirely surprised by what she discovered. Marcus stood quietly among the aftermath of violence, his hands steady despite having just engaged in lethal combat. The transition from warrior back to father was already beginning, his thoughts turning to Sophia and the explanations that would be required when this story inevitably spread beyond the facility walls. Commander Walsh approached Marcus with the bearing of someone addressing an equal rather than subordinate personnel. "Sergeant Major Rivera, I believe we need to have a comprehensive discussion about your current assignment and your future with this facility. Your personnel file makes for very interesting reading." Morrison stepped forward, his face reflecting the weight of embarrassment and genuine remorse. "Rivera, I owe you an apology that goes far beyond what happened tonight. I treated you with disrespect based on assumptions that were not only wrong but dangerous. You saved lives tonight because of experience and skills that I was too arrogant to recognize." Marcus nodded acknowledgement of the apology without malice or triumph. "We all make judgments based on limited information, sir. What matters now is that everyone is safe and the facility is secure. The tactical vulnerabilities I identified in my reports should be addressed before this type of assault is attempted again." The recruits gathered around Marcus with expressions of awe and curiosity. The questions came in a flood, details about his military service, the techniques he had employed during the engagement, and most importantly, why someone with his background was working as night janitor rather than in an instructional capacity. Marcus looked at the young faces surrounding him, remembering his own early days in special operations when he thought courage meant charging toward danger without considering consequences. Now he understood that true courage sometimes meant choosing the quiet path, the invisible service that protected the people who mattered most. 2 weeks later, Marcus stood in Commander Walsh's office wearing the instructor uniform that felt both familiar and strange after months of maintenance coveralls. The offer had been everything he could have hoped for professionally: tactical instructor position, significant pay increase, and the respect that came with recognized expertise. But the most important meeting was still ahead of him. Sophia sat in the base school cafeteria, waiting for her father to explain why other children were suddenly calling him a hero and why news crews had been asking questions about their family. Marcus knelt beside his daughter's chair, looking into eyes that held the same trust and love they had always carried. "Sophia, Daddy has something important to tell you about his new job and some things that happened at work recently." Sophia listened with 80-year-old solemnity as Marcus explained about his military background and the night he had helped protect people at the base. Her questions were simple and direct. Was he hurt? Were the bad people caught? Would his new job still let him help her with homework every morning? When Marcus finished his explanation, Sophia smiled with the pure acceptance that only children possess. "So you were always a hero, Daddy. You just had a different uniform when you were protecting people before. Now you get to teach other heroes how to be better at protecting people too." Commander Walsh had restructured Marcus's position to accommodate his parental responsibilities. Day shift instruction with evenings free for Sophia, advanced tactical training development, and consultation on facility security improvements. The work utilized his expertise while respecting his priorities. Morrison approached Marcus after his first official training session, extending his hand with genuine respect. "Your tactical modifications to our breach procedures are already showing results. The recruits are learning techniques that could save their lives in real operations. Thank you for sharing your knowledge despite how I treated you initially." Marcus shook Morrison's hand, appreciating the man's growth and humility. "We all serve the same mission, sir. Preparing these men to protect others and return home safely to their families. That is what matters most. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that extraordinary people walk among us every day, let us know where you are listening from around the world. Sometimes the most powerful heroes are the ones who choose quiet service over recognition, and every community has hidden champions waiting to be discovered. Subscribe for more stories that celebrate the hidden strength in ordinary people.